Imagine this. You're wandering the bustling avenues of ancient Rome in the year 67 AD when you see something that chills you to the core. There, moving confidently through the forum, is Emperor Nero himself, flanked by his new bride, a striking young woman adorned in rich fabrics and glittering gems. But as they pass, hushed voices ripple behind them, because everyone knows the terrible secret. That woman at the emperor's side was not always a woman. Once that figure was a boy named Sporus. What Nero did to him is among the most haunting examples of manipulation and brutality in the ancient world. Before we uncover this dark chapter of Roman history, consider subscribing and hitting the like button if you enjoy deep dives into the untold corners of the past. And feel free to leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. It's amazing that we can connect across time zones and continents to explore stories like these. What follows isn't merely a tale of decadence. It's a window into how unchecked power warps love into obsession, grief into delusion, and a human being into a living puppet made to fulfill one man's shattered vision of what he lost. You might not recognize the name Sporus now, but once you've heard his story, it's unlikely you'll ever forget it. Let's begin with the man responsible for this tragedy. Nero wasn't born a monster. Early on, many Romans thought he might be a savior. At only 16, he took the throne, and his first acts as emperor gave hope. He cut taxes, funded public festivals, and even entertained the masses with theatrical performances. For a while it seemed like a new golden age might dawn. But power, especially limitless power, corrupts even the brightest spirits. By 65 AD, something inside Nero had irreversibly cracked. Perhaps it was the growing paranoia of a ruler surrounded by rivals. Or maybe it was the loneliness that comes from being an emperor, always obeyed, never contradicted. Or perhaps it stemmed from the loss of the one person he claimed to love above all else, a woman named Poppaea Sabina. Poppaea was more than a pretty face. She was ambitious, cunning, and stunningly beautiful. Nero, already married to Octavia, the daughter of the former emperor, found in Poppaea everything Octavia was not. Where Octavia was reserved and dignified, Poppaea was magnetic and outspoken. She craved attention and reveled in her influence. Their affair began scandalously, like so many in Roman high society, but it soon escalated into something much darker, a deep and dangerous fixation. Nero didn't merely love Poppaea, he became obsessed with her. He couldn't bear other men glancing her way. He installed guards around her, not for her safety, but to monitor her every move. He showered her with riches, rare gems, eastern silks, fragrant oils. But those gifts were really chains of devotion. Even more disturbingly, he began reshaping the world around him to fit his fantasy. He divorced Octavia, inciting outrage among Rome's nobility, and then wed Poppaea in a lavish imperial ceremony. But marriage wasn't enough. Nero increasingly isolated her, filling her life with sycophants who owed everything to him. He had artists sculpt her likeness endlessly, so that even when she wasn't there, her image surrounded him. To outsiders, this might have seemed romantic. But it wasn't love, it was possession. Poppaea became more object than person, more symbol than spouse. Still, she was clever. She recognized her influence and used it carefully, securing favors for her family and allies. But she also miscalculated. Poppaea didn't fear Nero the way others did. She spoke her mind. She criticized his policies, mocked his stage performances, and pushed back when others dared not. And then came the fatal day. In 65 AD accounts differ. Some say they argued about Nero's late-night returns from the chariot races. Others blame his growing obsession with music and theatre. But what's agreed upon is this. During an argument, Nero struck Poppaea. She was pregnant at the time. Whether it was a brutal kick or a violent shove, the injuries were catastrophic. She died not long after, along with their unborn child. The aftermath was grotesque in its tragedy. The emperor, worshipped by millions, was reduced to a man screaming over the lifeless body of the woman he killed. He begged her to live. He ordered physicians to save her, threatening their lives if they failed. But it was already too late. In the days that followed, Nero spiraled. He embalmed her body rather than cremate it, an extreme break from Roman custom, and had her placed in a grand tomb. He declared her a goddess and built a temple in her name. He spoke to her corpse as if she were still alive. From then on, the entire imperial court was forced to play along with the illusion. Poppaea's seat remained empty at banquets. She was spoken of in the present tense. Any suggestion to move on was considered treasonous. And then Nero saw Sporus. He was probably no older than 14 or 15, a freed youth once enslaved in the imperial household. Sporus had grown up within palace walls. That afforded him a unique position: educated, trusted, yet utterly dependent on the emperor's favor. But what drew Nero to Sporus wasn't his intelligence or wit, it was his face. Multiple sources describe Sporus as eerily resembling Poppaea, especially his delicate features and large, expressive eyes. To a man shattered by guilt and madness, it was enough to convince him that Sporus was something more than a boy. He was a second chance, a mirror of what he had destroyed. Of course, Sporus was male, but to Nero, who believed himself above mortality, who had spent months speaking to a corpse, that was just a technicality. What happened next is almost too horrifying to believe. Nero decided Sporus would become Poppaea, not just in dress, but in body, manner, and identity. The emperor ordered Rome's finest surgeons to operate on Sporus, to alter him surgically in order to make him appear more feminine. This wasn't just gender-based violence, it was calculated annihilation of a person's identity. Surgery in ancient Rome was crude and incredibly risky. Anesthesia was primitive, tools were blunt. Infection was likely. Sporus, barely more than a child, would have been pinned down by guards, screaming, as physicians cut into him. Assuming he survived, he was no longer the person he had once been. He couldn't have children. He would never again be considered fully male. He was a ghost, an echo of someone else. After a long recovery, Nero made an announcement that stunned the empire. He was going to marry Sporus. A full imperial wedding was planned, consuming massive resources. Sporus, now renamed Sabina after the deceased Poppaea, was given a new wardrobe, crafted by imperial tailors to hide his male features. He wore Poppaea's jewelry. The same gems that had once adorned a beloved empress were now used to complete this grotesque resurrection. He was trained relentlessly. Makeup artists taught him to soften his features. Hairdressers reshaped his locks into ornate styles. Voice tutors forced him to speak in higher pitches. Etiquette trainers coached him in the art of feminine posture and gestures. He was turned into a copy, a replacement, and then came the wedding. Held during spring festivals in 67 AD, it was as extravagant as any Roman wedding, perfumed, candlelit, full of music and ceremony. To anyone unaware, it might have seemed a celebration of love, but those who knew the truth could only watch in silent horror. Nero had married a teenage boy who now lived under the name of his dead wife. Sporus, now Sabina, was treated like a true empress. He had his own attendants, palace quarters, even his own ceremonial litter. But every luxury came with a price, complete surrender of his identity. He existed solely to sustain Nero's fantasy. In public, he had to act the part perfectly. Nero spoke to him as though he were Poppaea, referencing memories that Sporus had never experienced. He had to smile, nod, respond as though they had lived a life together, though none of it was real. Historians describe Sporus as growing increasingly despondent over time. He mastered the role, because failure could mean death. But inside, he seemed to fade. The boy he once was erased. In 66 AD, Nero traveled to Greece, intent on winning glory in artistic competitions. Sporus went too, presented to foreign courts as Rome's empress. Imagine the confusion. Greek nobility being asked to honor a boy in drag as imperial royalty, all to feed Nero's delusion. But Nero's empire was crumbling. By 68 AD, rebellion spread. Governors refused orders. The Senate declared Nero an enemy of the state. The Praetorian Guard turned against him. As Nero fled with a few loyal followers, Sporus among them, he realized the end had come. Cornered in a villa outside Rome, Nero took his own life. With Nero dead, Sporus's nightmare should have ended, but it didn't. He became a symbol, passed from one ambitious man to another. First to Nymphidius Sabinus, then to Otho, then to Vitellius. Each used him the way Nero had, keeping him dressed as a woman, calling him Poppaea. But under Vitellius, the degradation hit rock bottom. The emperor planned to force Sporus to appear in the Colosseum, in a staged scene of sexual violence and humiliation for public entertainment. It would be the final blow, a symbolic destruction of Nero's legacy. Sporus refused. Rather than suffer that fate, he made the only decision still his. He took his own life, likely by poison, in 69 AD. He was at most 20 years old. With his death, Sporus escaped the living horror he had endured. But his story didn't die. Ancient writers didn't memorialize him as a victim. They saw him as a footnote to Nero's madness. Yet what makes his tale so tragic is not just the physical suffering. It's how he was robbed of everything that made him an individual. The moment Nero saw his face and recognized Poppaea, Sporus ceased to exist as himself. He became a puppet, a mask, And yet, in choosing death over further humiliation, Sporus reclaimed something that had been stolen from him: agency. We'll never know who he was before all this, what he dreamed, what he wanted from life. But we do know how he ended it, on his terms. That alone makes him more than just a side note. It makes him human, and it makes his story worth remembering, not for its shock value, but for the profound warning it offers about the cost of unchecked power and the silent suffering it can inflict. Even across 2,000 years, the echoes of Sporus's pain and courage still reach us. Let's not forget him.